Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for a special live broadcast as we take a look at the Ukraine crisis, which is escalating by the hour. Over 2.2 million people have fled Ukraine so far, and 7.5 million children are at grave risk of physical and psychological impacts. Today, we're traveling to Romania, where our president, Michael Messenger, is currently located after being on the ground at the Romania Ukraine border to see World Vision's response to this ongoing crisis. You'll see and hear firsthand about how refugee mothers and children are traversing, how we have been responding, and how you can help. Now, let's welcome World Vision Canada President Michael Messenger to share a live update of his experience so far. Hi,
Hi,
Michael.
Karen Luz.
Where
Hey,
are
it's
you
good to
joining
see
us from
you.
today?
Well, I'm here in Bucharest, Romania, which is the capital of Romania. I've just come from the border areas where we've been all week and seeing firsthand World Vision's work and gathering stories. It's been quite a remarkable time joining our World Vision Romania team, who actually have been on the ground providing support right from the beginning of the conflict. Well, maybe actually, as we just get things kicked off, why don't I share a little bit about what we've been seeing and get a glimpse of sort of what the situation is from the firsthand perspective. Um, you know, Really, when we think about what we're seeing, first of all, the numbers are staggering, as you've already said. 2.5 million children, people who have fled Ukraine, and the UN estimates that there are millions more to come. We have seen that most of them actually are women and children. So families have been separated with men under the age of 50 left behind. And we've visited and seen many scenes like we see here from the border that we captured in Suret, of families coming with just the clothes on their back, a wheeling suitcase behind them, or pushing a stroller. It's been challenging, to say the least, to see this trickle of refugee continue to carry on. And what we've heard from these families has been heartbreaking. Stories of fear and loss. I remember talking with one mother, Natalia, in one of our children's spaces, who was telling us that the heartbreak of leaving her husband at the border behind when they dropped her off, knowing that he had to go back and fight. The kids were confused. They were scared. They didn't really know what was happening. They were walking and traveling through a blizzard. Just You could just see the concern that she had in her face, and of course her young children, 12, 9, and 3, were looking at her and feeling that same sense of loss, but also confusion. And so that's been a story we've heard again and again and again, unfortunately, during this time. But World Vision is taking action, working alongside our partners. So really, the first element of our work has been to try to provide the necessary support for families to survive. And so in the early days, we were providing basic things like food, support for medications, hygiene kits. We're continuing to do some of that work, but really we're now stepping back and looking to say, how can we make even greater difference and work alongside other agencies that are also on the ground, supporting partners, working in camps, some that are transition, some for longer term accommodation, equipping them with the things that they need. And that's really, the key for us is we think about what's next. And that is really transitioning our response from just these initial stages as critical need for handouts, but as the number of refugees grows, as the crisis widens to encompass all of the Eastern European countries, and of course in Ukraine itself, we're transitioning our approach to scale, to work better together. We have international teams coming in, experts in refugee response that are helping us to drive the next phase of our response. We're growing our reach. We're also reaching into Ukraine to reach families there. We have a couple of convoys that have gone already to assist a hospital in Ukraine, about 70 kilometers from the Romanian border. So, and an ongoing assessment for what we can do next. But for me, my job this past week, has been not to do the operations, but to help tell the stories of people affected, both those who are the refugees themselves, amplify their voices, but also tell the stories of our teams who are volunteering or working to help support, tell the stories of communities who have really welcomed refugees with open arms, but also to even and to share a little bit about, through my Canadian eyes, I guess, about what it would mean for us to be in the same kind of situation. So many things are similar in this crisis compared to other refugee places around the world. But what's different is the speed, the scale, the scope. And I know that we're going to explore that a bit more today. I'm just really delighted, and I know you'll introduce him in a minute, for Nhial to join us, who has lived experience, not just the observer status that I have, but I think together we'll be able to give a picture of what's different and what's new, especially for these families as they worry about the future.
Thanks, Michael, for giving us a glimpse of what it's like to be with the fleeing Ukrainian refugees at this time. It's devastating to see the faces and how they've been affected. And like Michael mentioned, we're now going to be joined by Nhial Deng, a member of the Global Refugee Education Council, which is a project funded by the Government of Canada through Global Affairs Canada. Nhial is a 23-year-old South Sudanese refugee, writer, and community activist. He spent 11 years in the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya after fleeing an armed attack on his village in Ethiopia. He now attends Huron University in London, Ontario, where he's pursuing a Bachelor of Arts in Global Studies and Digital Communications. He's passionate about the role of education, mentorship, and social entrepreneurship. And with firsthand experience, he firmly believes that education is critical to helping young refugees secure a more hopeful and brighter future for themselves and their communities. Nhial will join Michael for a conversation around his experience on the ground and dive deeper into the work World Vision is doing in response to the Ukrainian refugee crisis, as well as chiming in with his own insights from his lived experience as a refugee and advocate. So welcome, Nhial. Where are you joining us from today?
Thank you, Karen Lewis. I'm glad to join this conversation. I'm joining from London, Ontario, in Canada.
Incredible. For our audience tuning in live right now, we actually have a designated Q&A time for Michael and Nhial to answer questions from you, the audience, near the end of the program. So definitely send us your questions in the comment window on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll answer those during our Q&A time. So over to you, Nhial, to kick off our conversation.
Thank you so much, Karen Lewis, for the introduction. I'm so glad to be chatting with you today, Michael, about what you have experienced for us at the Ukraine border. Many people, including myself, are watching this situation escalate. I want you to help us understand this a bit and try to bring the current situation that we're seeing on the ground to us here home in Canada by sharing a personal experience that really struck home for you.
Yeah, first of all, Nhial, I wanted to say once again, I'm so glad we can be part of this. Thanks for all you're doing with the Refugee Education Council, and that you can help me understand, what may be different and similar in this setting compared to what you've lived in your own experience and that of your family. I think the personal experiences that really are memorable for me are the stories behind the numbers. So we said at the outset, 2.5 million refugees have already fled Ukraine. The UN estimates perhaps another 2.5 million more to come. Here in Romania, where I am, and where World Vision's work has kind of started, it's estimated about 200,000 refugees have come into this country. Now, not all of them stay; some of them go on, but there's a constant churn of people moving around, and so we can get kind of taken in by the numbers. But it's really the stories behind those numbers that I find just help us remember that these numbers aren't just statistics; they're actually people with lived experience. So the one that just is fresh for me, I just met this family today. A woman, I'll call her Irena. She and her 8-year-old son Peter are in one of the temporary accommodations here in Bucharest, Romania, in the city. So they entered into Romania. They've traveled by train into the city here and have found a place now to stay for a period of time, and World Vision supporting the shelter where they are. But Irene's story is this: she is from the city of one of the initial cities that was being, the military action started. She was describing the fact that she had about 40 minutes to decide what she and her son could take. They had been talking, they had been growing increasingly worried about the war and what its impact, the violence was coming closer. They saw military units in the streets and heard gunfire and shelling. And she had been talking to her husband, who knew was not going to be able to leave, in part because of ill health. But she got a call from a Baptist church group that had 2 seats left on a bus that was leaving the country. She had 40 minutes to pack what she had, gather her son, and make her way across the city in Kyiv to get to this bus. Destination, she didn't know where they were going. She was just relieved to get on there, and they drove and drove and drove and finally made it to the Romania border. She talked about her experience coming in and how she was trying to stay strong for her son, who was confused and anxious. They, unlike some refugees who know where they want to go, she had no sense. So she got on the train to Bucharest, arrived in the station, and all of a sudden her ability to keep it all together disappeared, and she burst into tears, had to sit down. And it was at that moment that a volunteer came over, recognized her, had a conversation with her, and welcomed her into this shelter where she is now today, where she's providing she can give safety and security for her family. Of course, she's still in touch with her husband, afraid for what's next, has no sense of where they might be going. It's complete unknown. But yet, this is a woman who, because she had spent some time in an American school at some point, spoke pretty good English, and therefore became a connecting point between the other refugee families in this shelter and the Romanian authorities and those who were trying to support, including people like us today. So she was in the middle of this, trying to deal with the uncertainty, and yet she was giving back to her own community in just incredible ways. It just really struck me just how deep, and she was just so humble in what she was saying. She said, I don't know how I deserve this among others who are still stuck there, but yet I'm going to take advantage of this and do what I can to share to others. It's those moments of personal sacrifice and connection that stay with me, and that's one that's resonating for me today.
Thank you for sharing that, Michael. I think it's very important for people to know that the statistic that we are seeing, the 2.5 million people that we see on our TV screens, on the newspapers we just pick, are actually human beings, with dreams, with hopes, who have a home, and all they wanted was a place, where they could live peacefully, where their kid could go to school. This is story and what I've been seeing on the news remind me on my own personal story when I had to flee Ethiopia at the age of 11 and then find myself in Kakuma refugee camp. I was lost, I was devastated, I was frustrated, and I lived in that camp for 11 years. Children and young people often bear the biggest burden of war and are affected mostly emotionally, physically, and mentally. Can you elaborate on on the importance of psychosocial support for displaced children, and how do well-vision's psychosocial first aid and service-based work to support them?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, but let me ask you a question first, Nhial. I mean, what are your memories and your feelings when you think back to your experience at the age of 11, fleeing from your home, becoming a refugee? What do you remember as a child yourself, being in the middle of that transition?
Thank you so much for asking that question. I think when I look back on my story, I was just lost. At the age of 11, I woke up one early morning, my village was burning down. I had gunshot, I had people screaming outside. I saw someone bleeding on the ground, and I just couldn't understand what was happening. I was having a very beautiful childhood, and then that single morning, everything vanished away. And when I came to Kakuma refugee camp, I was lost. I came into this camp with over 200,000 refugees. I knew no one. I had no father with me, no mother with me, no siblings, and I just never knew about the state of my future. I had a dream. I wanted to go to school, but I didn't know if I'll ever be able to achieve that dream. And I just had a lot of uncertainty happening in my mind, and I think that traumatized you a lot. The fact that you never know what tomorrow holds for you. When I was back in Ethiopia, I knew that tomorrow I'm going to wake up, I'll go to school and play with kids from the neighborhood. But when that happened, you are a kid at the age of 11 and you don't know what's happening tomorrow, the next day. And that traumatized you onto you for a very long time.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, because, and the reason I asked you that, and as I know that you had the opportunity over the years to process some of those feelings, but what I'm seeing and hearing from children here, and we know they're affected in the refugee setting and coming from Ukraine, are exactly those same things. So kids have had everything that they've known sort of stripped away from them: their schooling, their family, the education environment that they've been in, and now they're going, and they don't even fully understand exactly what's causing all of this. So their parents are also reflecting fear, worry, and concern. And the kids pick up on that, but yet they don't have the processing capacity really to be able to understand. And so it's really concerning. And I was talking this week, I interviewed one of the psychologists who are right at the front lines of welcoming people into Romania, or talking with kids about this. And she said that it's really important as a first step, alongside providing physical support to families, that we provide psychological first aid, especially for children, because we know that if they're given a space to understand, to actually get away from the chaos of all the insecurity, even just to find a safe space, safe space, like what World Vision is providing for kids to play, to have conversations with trained psychologists or social workers, that makes a huge difference for how resilient they are going forward. If we can help address those needs early, that's key going forward. And so that's why, as part of World Vision's toolkit, if you will, in supporting refugees, is psychological first aid. And we've developed this over the years. We've learned from experiences like yours, Nhial, and many others, that is really important. And so that's a critical element, because unfortunately, in almost every conflict and every setting like this, it's marginalized groups, children, who are often the most affected by the trauma and the misery that they're experiencing.
Thank you, Michael, for shining a light on this important piece. This is something that often get lost in the news, and we don't see that, and we don't realize that actually the trauma that children and even their families face, carry on for a very long time. And I think this is something that people forgot sometimes about the conflict, that it does not just happen once in a while. The children, the family that are fleeing Ukraine right now, don't know about the step that tomorrow holds for them. And, having lived in Kakuma refugee camp, I understand very well, how long this cycle of conflict affect you, emotionally affect you, psychologically. And when you look at the current situation, how do you see it unfold in the next 1 year? And what do you think about it as it expands to other, neighboring countries?
Well, this is always the concern, isn't it? That this situation, which we have to remember, 2.5 million people have fled in the past 2 weeks. So this is a fresh crisis. If it seems like organizations like ours, normally when we were faced with the situation, we take several weeks to kind of get all the assessment done, to figure out what the best needs are. And as the crisis lengthens and worsens at the same time, we have to continually adjust, feeling a bit like we're, building a bicycle while we're riding it. If you know that kind of image, and as the longer the crisis carries on, the more people are involved, the more complex the situation becomes, and the more stresses are placed on everyone involved, whether that's the refugees themselves, families back home, the support systems for them, or even the neighboring countries around them. So, for example, I know, as I think to other settings, and you probably have some insights into this as well, but I think about the Syrian refugee crisis. So 11 years after the war, the conflict is continuing, which means that the millions of people who fled there have actually had to leave. They've crossed the borders, and the longer they're gone, the less likely they are to come back. So today, if I talk to every single Ukrainian I speak to, wants to go home, but the conditions have to be right. Well, that gets harder and harder as every day goes by. And what that means is we have to find a place for people to stay longer term, for those people who don't have a destination in place, and to be concerned about how local communities who are going to accommodate them, it puts stresses on the current infrastructure. I mean, so far, people in Romania, for example, have been incredibly welcoming to people. But what is that going to look like 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, a year, when all these people are now residents in there, and kids need to be cared for? They have to be part of educational institutions, have to be integrated. It puts stresses on many things, and it just makes the situation just that much more complex, which also means for organizations like ours, we have to adjust the way that we're doing it. We have to scale up and really get underneath the root causes of how we can ensure that those stresses don't get worse as the situation continues.
Thank you for sharing that global perspective and the long-term support that this family needs. And this is something very important because I think refugees do not just need to survive, as we're seeing right now, country hosting them, but they also need to thrive. These need to think long-term about the future of kids. Will they be able to go to school? Will their families have access to job? Will they have access to basic needs? Will they be able to integrate in the new communities? And you never know when they'll be able to go back home. So thank you for sharing that. I'm glad that World Vision is working along those lines. Try to support them, give them the long-term support. You have shared thing about the resilience of children, and I think whenever there's war and conflict, there are always incredible stories. The resilience, the humanity that you see, people welcoming in those fleeing. What is some good news you have had on the ground that can bring encouragement to us here listening from Canada?
It is so important to try to find stories of good news because it feels so overwhelming sometimes. And I can sit with people and be part of their lament with them and feel or pray with them, feel that the sense of despair. But the fact is that there are some moments that actually are just heartwarming. Uh, I think that war and conflict brings out the worst in people, but moments of crisis like that actually also bring out the best. I think probably an example, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier, is the incredible welcome that I have observed firsthand by the people of Romania to refugees who are coming in. I mean, just imagine what it would be like for 200,000 people to show up in your back door in your neighborhood without a place to go, needing food, shelter, care, medical support, psychological first aid. What would we do? Well, the people of Romania said we will do anything that we can because we want to support you. We have heard stories of so many Romanians welcoming refugee families into their homes to stay with them indefinitely, providing support. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of people and many organizations at the border providing everything from hot drinks and hot meals to medical care, places for kids to play. There's even a group on the border working with refugee pets. A lot of people in Ukraine have taken their family members, including their pets, with them, and there's providing support for them. So it's just been an incredible outpouring of love and compassion that I don't see any signs of it flagging anytime soon, which is really, it's remarkable. So that's been really encouraging. A second element that I've celebrated is just the way that organizations like ours are working even better together and are committed to partnering both in Canada and in the field. So if you were to come to the Surrett border camp, where our little area where World Vision is working is right next to Save the Children, which is doing similar kind of work. We're working together. UNICEF is there, along with the Red Cross and others. So the more that we work together there, the more effective we can be, the more coordinated, and avoid overlap, and ensure that we are all doing the best things that we're all equipped to do. And then, of course, here in Canada, we're working closely with the Humanitarian Coalition. If you've ever watched an interview that I've done on the news, I always say that the first place to do is support organizations on the ground, but there are 12 of them that are working together in the Humanitarian Coalition. We're raising funds together right now, as well as for our own agencies. And I think that sends a signal to Canadians as well that we're committed to collaborating and not just competing. So we're working hard to do that. That's so encouraging. And the final thing is I'm just encouraged actually by the response that Canadians have made to supporting the needs of families here. So that makes me feel good in the midst of a lot of darkness, I'll tell you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I have one final quick question. And this is something that I've experienced myself. Whenever I speak to people tell me how inspiring my story is. And I always tell people, I don't want just my story to inspire you. I want my story to inspire you to do something. And I think when we hear incredible stories like what you're sharing right now, the countries, small country like Romania welcoming refugees, people going to the border to volunteer to give pets, to give kids toys. I think those are really inspiring stories, and I'm glad World Vision and many other organizations around the ground to support them. How do you think ordinary people, ordinary citizens across Canada and the world can support this incredible work that is happening on the ground?
Yeah, the very best way people can do that is by donating to organizations that are working there. I know Canadians have just incredible, generous hearts. By all means, share stories. At the end of the time, we'll share some ways that you can donate. You can actually take action and learn more. But I think that's the most important thing. The fact that people have dialed in or tuned in today or may watch later on, Nhial, shows that they care already. And so this is just a way to continue that support. That's the best thing. Unfortunately, the needs far outstrip the resources available to organizations like ours right now to respond. And that's a real issue.
Thank you so much, Michael, for joining today. I'm so glad I'm able to speak to you. And this has been an encouraging and informative session for me, and I go for many others who join as well. I hope you have a great stay in Romania, and for the work you do. Thank you so much for that. I will hand over now to Karen Lewis, who is going to take us over the next section.
That was such an insightful conversation to listen to, and I especially appreciated the insights of having psychosocial support from the get-go, considering the fact that the mental impact and emotions around conflict can stay long after the danger has passed. So thank you both for sharing your lived experiences and what you've been observing. So at this time, we're now answering questions that have come in from the audience. And just a reminder that you can continue to send us your questions in the comments on Facebook and YouTube. So, Michael, I actually have a question for you. What are the biggest struggles that you see in neighboring countries in terms of caring for refugees? What are the biggest challenges that teams are facing right now?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kale, and frankly, it's one that is really top of mind. I was just listening to the news today while I was about ready to give an interview. I was hearing about the stresses that are on the countries like Poland, which is welcomed 1.5 million refugees, Moldova, and places like Romania. I mean, they're getting close to what they may be able to have capacity, but yet there are millions of more people coming. So the challenges are, how do we support those countries to continue to provide that support? I was mentioning just how encouraged I've been by how welcoming the Romanians have been. That's great, but if all of a sudden the infrastructure doesn't support the number of people that are here, the sentiment could turn, or even people of goodwill may find it frustrating to be able to know how best to support. So the challenges really are, how do we come alongside the countries that are being so hospitable and do what we can to support them, because the stress and strain on those neighbors is going to only grow.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of which, we are all, I see some comments here that are asking about, as the situation continues to evolve, how can we continue to push for world peace? Because I know the last thing that anybody would want is for conflict to escalate more and expand more. But yeah, how can we continue to push for world peace as the situation evolves?
Well, there are lots of experts on political issues and the kinds of things, and there's no lack of commentary about that. What I keep coming back to the issue, though, from our perspective, is let's look at what the impact of this conflict is having on vulnerable people and the humanitarian crisis as a result. There's no way that we will enable people to come back to Ukraine to address their needs if there's not peace. So we call on members of the international community to redouble their efforts to stop the conflict, to make space for people to have humanitarian access, and ensure that we are calling for peace in the midst of all of this. That's our singular focus on it. And we're just telling the stories from the ground so that people understand the implications of ongoing and worsening conflict on vulnerable people and children.
For sure, and the children of Ukraine are worth advocating for peace. Our next question is for Nhial. What's struck you the most hearing about how World Vision is responding to the crisis unfolding today?
I think two things stand out for me, from my conversation with Michael. One is the psychological support for children. I think that is a very important piece that is often overlooked in conflict crisis, and that is something I experienced firsthand when I was playing my community and artist in Kakuma for 11 years. The next thing would be, just treating these figures as human stories. Michael shared one story earlier about his encounter with the refugees, and I think that is something very important, knowing that, the figures that we're seeing on our TV, the 2.5 million are human stories, with hope, with dream, who want peace, who want to go back home, who want the kids to go to school, families who have hope. And I think that is something very important.
And something to actually follow up from the audience, how have you handled the remnant effects of being a refugee and actually having lived the impact of conflict?
I think it's a lot of mixed emotion. For me, I think when I fled my country 11 years ago, I never wished that children like myself or under my age would have to go through that experience. And while I was in Kakuma, I tried to do some peace building work to make sure that these people are leaders who can go and contribute toward building those country. And I think that is something that is standout. What is in my own experience as a refugee, I think what I always ask for is just peace, because that is the most important thing. Making sure that people can go home. If there is no peace, refugees will continue pouring out of Ukraine. They'll continue pouring out of many other conflict-affected crises. So I think the most important thing for me is peace.
Amen to that. And a couple questions for Michael. Where are the refugees staying in terms of like their location? Like where the camp are there camps near the border, or are there other camps like further into the country?
Well, what's interesting is that for a lot of the refugees, they're not going to any kind of camp at all. So particularly the very first wave of refugees from Ukraine were people who were traveling early on, and they had cars, and usually with a destination to go to. So it could be, there are Ukrainians who live all over the world, and family members elsewhere. So many of those people had both the means to travel to them and a place to go. So it could be a family member or a friend in one of the neighboring countries. The next round, though, really are the ones that the people that we're most concerned about, and that is those who don't know where they're going or don't have a connection, like the people that I was speaking to in the shelter in Bucharest today. And it's for them we have to figure out the accommodation. So if you were to go to the border today, you'd see that there are tents or kind of transit centers around the area where people can go and rest. But in Siret, for example, there's kind of a sports stadium where there's a whole series of tents and support areas. People only stay there one night or two before they move on to the next area. That's sort of the sense that people are moving on. So there's no sense right now that there are permanent settlements. Even when they get to Bucharest, there are areas where we are looking for more permanent accommodation. Like I said, there's a network of shelters within Bucharest, and one of these today has expanded to receive a number of refugee families, and that's going to be the case, I think, going on. Some of those people are just there for a short time, again, have been there for a week and then moved on when they identify a place to go. But others, like Irena that I spoke about earlier, they have no place to go, they have no means, and they may be there longer term. So it's more likely that we'll see accommodation in communities in the same way that we've seen that in Jordan, where most of the refugees are there. But we'll just have to keep monitoring the situation. But I would say that in this context, it's probably unlikely that we'll see big, large camps like we might see at the edge of Jordan or Lebanon, at least at these early stages.
Michael, thanks so much for your observations and everything that you've witnessed. So our time is now, it's coming to a close, but I just have one final question for now. What's one encouragement or challenge you would share with Canadians from your experience as a refugee? How would you encourage us to respond and help?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think, to me, as I shared earlier, when I fled my country, I was traumatized. I was frustrated. I was lost. But my life took a turn when I went to school in Kakuma refugee camp, because in school I was able to find solace. I was able to find hope. I could think again about a glowing future. And I think, for children who are fleeing Ukraine now, I think, one of the most important things is that they're able to go back to school, that kids are able to go back to school, because I believe, this school will give them a space where they could, be able to let go of their trauma, where they can heal, and where they can think again about a glowing future. And we have the next generation of leaders, of social entrepreneurs, of engineers who are going to help rebuild their countries and contribute to world peace. And I think, ways people across Canada can support and across the world is, trying to support organizations that are working on the ground, to ensure that these kids, do not just survive, but thrive, able to go to school, able to, their parents are able to make a living, I think universities have a role to play as well. There are many university students across Ukraine who fled, their country and they cannot go back to school. So making sure they offer immediate placement so that they can continue their studies. Even schools across, Romania and neighboring countries can, try to accommodate these kids in these schools so that they can, go back to school right away. So I think those are, what is very important to me.
All right. Thank you so much for your thoughtful answers. And that's all the time we have together today. Thanks so much to our viewers for sending us your questions. And a big thank you to both Neil and Michael for joining us today. It was really impactful hearing from both of you. And Neil, I really love what you've said about how refugees don't need to just survive, they need to thrive. And I appreciated also, Michael, that you talked about how these moments of crisis do show the worst in people, but they also show the best. And seeing what teams are doing in collaboration on the ground and hearing about the story of hope from you, Nhial, of your own life, has been really inspiring.
Thanks, Gail.
Take care for having us today.
So, if you'd like to donate to help provide care and support for children and families who've been forcibly displaced, you can do so using the link shared in the comments. And you can also sign our petition using the link in the comments and join us in calling for peace and the protection of children who are critically impacted by this conflict. Lastly, prayer is really powerful, and we invite you to pray for peace to be restored quickly and that children and families will be protected from harm. And finally, thank you so much for taking some time this afternoon to tune in with us. From all of us at World Vision Canada, we wish you a great weekend.